Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. Once again, I'm recording this on Thursday evening, so if you had any questions that came in after this, then please re-ask them next week. There was just some scheduling stuff, so I'd rather do it a little early than not do it at all. But anyway, let's jump in and see what we got this week. First up, over on Floatplane, Captain Compost asked if we have any idea if the 8-bit DOE customizable arcade sticks will be compatible with their 2.4 gigahertz, the retro receivers, they call them. So I actually forgot to mention that in the podcast, but I did put it in the post. We have no clue, and they never told anybody. So, 8-bit DOE's marketing is very deliberate, and it's very obvious where it's coming from now. So I'm sure a lot of these things are done for specific reasons, but no, there's absolutely no other info on it, which stinks because stuff like that, you could get both the general crowd and nerds excited about it, but they tend to forget about us nerds. So I'll let everybody know, but it would make sense because they have retro receivers for a bunch of different consoles that would really be really cool to just have a wireless receiver working with it. But anyway, also Captain Compost said here's the beer that they talked about, and they posted a link to Total Wine, which is a kind of a chain of liquor stores, and you can find them right over from where I am in Manhattan in Jersey, and it's the Erdinger Dunkel. And I believe I've had this before, to be honest. At the moment, I'm drinking Founder's Dirty Bastard Scotch style ale, and it's pretty good. I like it. I like Founders. They have a lot of really good stuff. And for whatever reason, you could find these in the supermarket right by me. So I always end up drinking a lot of Founders just because that's, some of the best choices you can get around here. So thank you very much for the recommendation. I'm going to add that to my total wine list. I still have that Legion whiskey that I tried last time that I loved. I think I saved a little bit and dropped it off for Beast to try, but I'll add this to the list, pick this up, as well as some of the other stuff that I've gotten. So much appreciated. Now, over on Patreon, Alex Shamai said they're finally getting into the N64, found a decent deal and got a console with a controller and also an EverDrive. And in the EverDrive options, they see options to turn on or off the IPS or APS patches or auto IPS. What's the difference? So I'm not at all an expert in this. I probably should because it's a really cool thing, because rather than having to patch your ROMs and having 5 versions of the same ROM, you could toggle IPS patches. I think auto is if the patch is detected, it applies it, and if not, it doesn't, whereas on or off forces them on and off. But I honestly don't know. Also, is there a user manual for the EverDrive that I just can't seem to find? There should be stuff on Crix's website, but generally I go to the forums for help, but I'm pretty sure there is a user manual up in the download section or something, or maybe even the product page itself. The last time I had to find info, it took a little while to figure out where there wasn't just like a manuals section or something. They really like to experience a console as it was intended, so they want to use an OEM controller. As you could probably guess, the joystick is kind of loose and feel like it's grinding. I opened it up and it had all the white powderized plastic that so many OEM controllers have these days due to that poor joystick design. Anyway, can you recommend a good replacement stick or replacement parts that would be true to the N64 sensitivity? The one I read about on the RetroRGB website, the sharpshooter, doesn't seem to be sold anymore. Also, do you think a generic component cable would look much worse than an OEM on a standard CRT? So that's all right. Last question. I'll separate the last question. So as far as the replacement sticks go, My Life in Gaming did a video about this a while back. A couple of people approached me with their design of the N64 analog sticks and wanted to know if I wanted to test it, but I had to be honest, I am far from an expert in the N64. It's not even close to one of my favorite consoles. No disrespect, N64 fans always get mad when I say that. So I suggested they send it to My Life in Gaming, who Mark is a big N64 fan, and I don't remember if they followed up or if there's going to be a follow-up, but I would start with their video on it and see the suggestions that they had, and see what else is available, because I know for a while there was a couple of Kickstarters or something that I don't know if they ever shipped, or if they did, they shipped like a year late, so I just stopped paying attention. But yeah, I'm not an N64 expert. I kind of wish I knew a little bit more about it. And I probably will, because there's other future videos coming up that I need to learn a little bit more, or I guess relearn more about what I used to know about it. But and your final question, generic component cable will look much worse than an OEM one on a standard CRT. Depends what console. I've seen garbage PlayStation 2 component cables that were so bad that people... And not only were they so bad, but so many people were using them that people started to think like certain scalers had problems. There was even a rumor going around that the PlayStation's component output was not as good as its RGB output, PlayStation 2, of course. But the truth is, it just comes to find out people were using complete garbage cables. So if it's one of those scenarios where the only cable you have access to, like the only OEM cables are $100 and the cheap ones are $5, then, you know, maybe suck it up for the short term and figure out what you're going to do, you know, if you want to spend that much, if that's what you're going to want to deal with. But for me personally, in a scenario like that, I would buy the cheap one first and see if it's something I even care about, and then kind of go for the better one. And in fact, the only time I would ever not recommend that is those garbage plug and play HDMI cables. Because if you have a garbage component video cable, you're going to have brightness issues, you're going to have some interference on the screen, but I mean, it's not going to hurt the gameplay. It's just going to not be as good as it could. Where there's those garbage HDMI cables, you're going to add lag, you're going to get that headache-inducing flicker. So that's the situation where I would not go with the cheap one. But in many of the other cases, if you're on a budget, yeah, go for it, and then kind of get one of the better ones when you can. Bradley wants to know, with the Sega CD library now playable on a Genesis with only a flash cart, do you think it will be possible in the future to do the same with 32X? I know the console is complicated given its connections, but do you think this could be done in a larger format flash card with the required analog connections? Or would the architecture of the 32X make this too expensive or difficult? I've heard about different hardware failures with the 32X, so it seems like it could be a good product to make, even if it's on the expensive side. So theoretically, you know, yes, it's 100% possible, but you would need to make an FPGA-based device that also accepts analog input, muxes it with its own analog output, just like the 32X itself does, and it would have to very specifically have a Genesis 2 input, and at that point, you might as well have a Genesis 2 output for it. So it would essentially be a full replacement for the 32X, all based off of FPGA. So, and it would also, I would either have to output analog video only, or it would have to do an analog to digital conversion. So at that point, I mean, it would be much cheaper to buy an original 32X, an OSSC or a RetroTink, and then have the 32X recapped. You're talking about the same cost for the same exact performance. So while I think it's technically possible, I don't know if anybody's going to do it. I mean, I hope they do. I'd buy it. There's enough 32X games that I really enjoy that I would totally want to play it. But I think what would be more likely is a full FPGA implementation on something like the Mister. So the Genesis and 32X would be all running off of the Mister together. There's no cables to plug in. And I've spoken to the team about that, and I don't know how far they got into looking into it, other than they would have to be creative in how they figured out how to do this, because it starts to get pretty crazy when you're talking about what's going on between those two things. So to answer your question, while I think it could be done, I don't think it will be done, and I really, really do hope that somebody would have some sort of FPGA implementation, even if it's a Mr. Core or something like that. But I do have a Polymega that I'm going to be testing, and there's potential for that to be pretty low latency and pretty easy to just plug in and go. So while I do prefer original hardware first, just because, I mean, I'm a nerd and that's my preference, FPGA recreation second, I'm still a giant fan of software emulation, mostly for CD-based consoles and beyond, but also stuff like this is much easier. So, I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing with the Polymega. I'm so backlogged. I have no idea if I'll be able to even do a full review of it. But either way, I'm going to try my best to give it a shot. And even if I end up just collaborating with somebody else, 32X is something we're definitely going to dig into. And of course, there's going to be lag tests, because apparently I'm that guy now. Kelv SYC wants to know my opinion on if I think there will be an FPGA replication of an early era CD console in the style of an analog console where you have like a working modern CD drive and an FPGA core working together to play original discs. Or do I think the effort would be too much for too little benefit, both in business and game preservation terms, and software emulation solutions like Polymega are probably the way to go if you want a modern experience using original discs. Related to this, for these consoles, would you rather have an FPGA replication that also acts as an ODE, but support an external disk drive attachment that would allow you to play games from original discs, as opposed to using the discs as a glorified dumper like the Polymega seems to be doing? So I got a whole bunch of thoughts on that. I do think, if done right, that people would really appreciate something like this, as well as appreciate an ODE perspective of it. And I do think the Polymega is a happy medium, because you do get to you get to take your disc off the shelf and you get to take your own copy out and put it in and get that nostalgic feeling that you got. Or even if you're young and you never had those games when you were little, because maybe you weren't born yet, but you still get to have the experience of it, even if you are essentially playing it off the hard drive. But I do like the fact, I do think that if anybody were to do something like this, it would have to be both for all of those reasons, because part of the reason that you would want a professional device like this is to back your collection up in case disk rot ever is an issue. At the moment, disk rot is a massive issue for CDRs and Laserdiscs, but I don't really know of any original console games that are out of control dying because of it. But I absolutely do think that it's a feasible product, and I don't know if anybody's in the midst of designing one, I guess, but I think it's something that people would like. I also think that once consoles started to switch over to CDs, a lot of other things started to happen. First, there was a frame buffer, so that means that there's always going to be enough room for playing in software emulation, so there's less chance of any noticeable latency. Whereas the old school consoles, which everything was direct, you're really kind of stuck with FPGA if you want a no lag solution. But I also think that because of the graphics changes just around the same time, software emulation might be better, because you might be able to do things like render interlaced as progressive, actually render it, not just deinterlace it. You might be able to do things like those dithering effects, have those blend in automatically in the background so you don't see the dots. And none of that's easy to do, but it's easier than on something like an FPGA device, at least in its current form. So while I'm not an engineer, I'm just kind of pulling off my experience over many years of software emulation using, plus how everything I've been seeing with the Mister. So I guess a much shorter answer to your question is, I hope somebody does it. I don't know of anybody doing it yet, but I really hope they take the time to do it right and have both read off the disk and read off the hard drive capabilities. Normal Guy says, is it morally wrong to back up my games before I sell them on eBay? That's such a hard one to answer. I mean, yeah, but this is such a hard one. I'm sure I'm going to offend half of people listening no matter what I say. But my opinion, and just my stupid opinion on all of this stuff, is I've known a few people that were like, I'm going through hard times. I got to sell my collection because it's the only thing I have worth something. And I'm going to take a small piece of the money that I get from this giant collection and buy some ROM carts so I could still at least play the games. So I'm not so depressed that I lost my collection and the ability to even play them. And I even know a few people that just sold everything and got a Raspberry Pi for a short term until they got back on their feet. And in that case, I would never look down upon anybody, but I guess it really just, in my opinion, depends on how you approach it. If you're just like, I don't really need these anymore, I don't care about the collection. Yeah, I mean, consider supporting developers somehow, some other way. Consider supporting local game stores. But if you're like evilly in this to take people's money at the height of something's value, and you're just a hardcore salesman with no heart looking to take advantage of people, and you're gonna keep the ROM, and then it's all the mentality of it for me. Which it gets weird, because then it's a conversation of, well, who's more morally correct than the other, what's legal, what's not legal. But if if somebody told me, when many people have, like, hey, I ended up getting rid of my collection, but I still use ROM carts, I don't think they're bad people. The only times I think less of somebody is when they're bragging about taking advantage of somebody, and then I don't usually ever talk to that person again. But that doesn't sound at all like what you're asking. So that was a tricky question, and I feel like I just pissed off half the people listening. So hey, I'd rather have you mad for my own opinion, which change all the time, by the way, but I'd rather have you mad at me and my current opinion than make some crap up and have you be mad at a lie or something. Scanline City says, I have a Sony D32 BVM. You're just starting off strong, aren't you? You're just coming right out guns blazing. Given the widescreen aspect ratio, I think it would be cool to get some modern games running on it from, say, a PS4 or gaming PC with a 980 Ti VGA capable. I've had some issues in the past. Could you recommend the best setup option? First of all, obviously, I was just teasing. I have a D32. I scored it at the right place at the right time. And I've done a lot of experiments with this. And I did make a mistake. And I think I've told people about the mistake before, but let me just give you the quick rundown. I've tried HD, SDI, and SDI. So you're converting HDMI to that standard. And it only worked in 480i and 720p. It doesn't work at all in 480p, in 1080i, but don't play anything interlaced unless that's the only way you have to do it, because it's always so much better and progressive. And the first test I ran, Carsey was over, the speedrunner, and we did Wii U. I think it was Wii U through component video through some cheap component cables into the D32, and then we in 720p, and then we did the same exact test with HD SDI, and we both said, oh well, that definitely looks better. And I realized, and I think I'd repeated that a few times until I realized the Wii cables were garbage. So as soon as I got the HD RetroVisions, I ran the same test and it looked identical. So it's my suggestion that you start out all of these tests just setting the console or your video card to 720p, and then just using an HDMI to component video converter, which, as long as they don't scale the image, it's just a digital to analog converter, a DAC, they should be super cheap and zero lag. And I think you're going to get a really great image. The only other suggestion would be buy a short component video cable, or get the HD RetroVision component cables and try not to have too long of an analog signal, because the shorter the signal, the better. Really, I mean, I don't just talk about the HD RetroVisions because they're my friends. I mean, the amount of development and research that went into making those cables is insane. Like a 5-foot HD RetroVision cable has less interference than a 2-inch garbage cable. So, either get a really good cable like that, or just get really short cables, run the HDMI as long as you can, and you should have a really good experience. Now, I believe the D32 will also accept some PC resolutions as well, but I've never really messed with it because everything that I've sent it to it at 720p looked absolutely perfect. And there's a lot of stuff that I felt on both the modern consoles and even movies that I thought looked great that way too. And one other thing that you could try, if you're a movie fan, I know I've talked about this a lot, so I'll make this really quick. But if you have any old movies with lots of film grain, you could try the DVDs in 480p, but the other cool thing is try the Blu-rays in 480p. Same thing, HDMI to component converter. You might need to get one of those HDMI splitters so that you don't have to worry about HDCP or something, but I really, really loved how a lot of these old movies look, because the film grain mixed with the 480p scanline look, mixed with the way the CRT draws the image, really made me feel like I was watching an old movie, but in a pretty insanely high quality scenario. So I would also try that as well. And just for fun, like, watch that movie also in 720p, and I came to the conclusion that it's so clear I'd rather just at 720p just watch it on the flat panel. But it's an awesome BVM. And, I've seen your YouTube channel, by the way. You've got a couple cool videos on there about the different monitors you have and stuff like that. So if anybody wants CRT porn, check out Scanline City. But yeah, it's an awesome monitor. And, if anybody hears of other ones out there, there are some scalpers sitting on some, but there's also, I'm sure, some people out there that don't even know what they have. And I'm trying to get them in the hands of museums, preservationists, places that will never, ever ever resell them. They will get restored, and then they will sit at places until there's some kind of, occasional public event like that. So if you know anybody, let me know. And I've already talked to people where if I ever get like hit by a meteor, my BVM's going to the right place. It's not going to just get, sold off in some junkyard auction or something like that. It'll go to these museums and places like that that'll actually appreciate them and keep them. So if you hear of any more, or if you ever need to get rid of yours, let me know and I'll get them in the hands of the right people. Matt Richenberg says that they're having trouble booting their GDEMU Dreamcast into 240p. Are the steps the same for GDEMU Dreamcasts? I'm using games that support 240p and following your steps, and it always boots into 480p VGA. So that's a hardware thing. That's not a software thing. That will be the same on both discs and GDEMU, with the exception of some pretty extreme scenarios that I don't think you're talking about. So if you have like one of the new cables from Retro Access or Retro Gaming Cables, you need to flip the switch to 15 kilohertz mode. And if you're using just a straight up VGA cable, one of the cheap ones, they sell them good. I'm not, you probably, just because they're cheap doesn't mean they're bad, but just a cheap basic VGA cable for the Dreamcast, there won't be a switch. And a lot of these products out there that advertise 480i and 480p compatibility are lying. I had a company send me a free one to review, and I said, hey, I got it, but just one very important question. It says 480i compatibility, but there's no switch. Is there an internal switch? And they never got back to me. And I waited like a month before one of my Dreamcast videos came out and messaged them again, and they ignored me. So they knew they lied, and I told everybody about it in the video. So there you go. It's also proof that just because something's free doesn't mean I'm going to lie about it. I always tell the truth, and clearly I'm never going to get anything from that company again. But that could also be it. It could just be that you have one of those cheap devices where, a lot of them aren't bad. They're just analog to digital converters. So you'll have some aspect ratio issues and maybe a little bit of brightness or interference, but it's not like those really terrible cables that add a bunch of lag to it. But one of the downsides, there's no way to turn it into 15 kilohertz mode, so there's no way to have it support 480i or 240p. So I guess if you just want to follow up and let me know exactly what your cable solution is, I could probably help you with that. And also, thank you very much for helping me on the pronunciation. I really try to get it right. It's so important to me that I do, and I never do. So thank you. Robert Dickinson says they're currently working to get some arcade boards up and running. Ones they figure will get the most use will be the CPS2 and Taito F3 systems. Are there OSSC profiles developed for those two arcade systems or any others? So a bunch of people in the arcade community have figured out optimal timings for a bunch of them. I don't know if Firebrand X ever got around to making a profile for it. If he doesn't have a CPS2, then there's obviously no way to do that. But if you go on the OSSC wiki, I believe it publishes the full resolution, so you should be able to dial something in. And if you talk to FBX, if you're able to figure out all of the right settings based on the horizontal size and all of that, I'm sure he'd be willing to make a profile pack of those. I don't know about the Taito F3. And the biggest issues with this, as far as I know, so a lot of other people are much smarter than me when it comes to this stuff, but I think the biggest problem is finding the exact horizontal size of the game. And it's just because a game might be 384 pixels wide does not mean that's the full horizontal size. There's a bunch more that go into it. I talk about this in the video capture video I did in the whole video capture section of the website. So in order to truly get the correct size, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. One of them, and the most accurate way, is to put it on an oscilloscope with a special kind of pattern on there that generates it's not a checkerboard, it's just like a vertical black and white line pattern, and that will allow you to measure the time between. Steve walked me through that once because we wanted to just verify the horizontal width of 32x. I was 99.9% sure everybody got it right, but I thought it was a good exercise. Somebody had already created tools to do so, and it's pretty complicated, and without that specific pattern generated, there's no way to do it. So other than that, you could kind of hunt through emulation. There's a lot of documentation on MAME that has this stuff listed that might help, but that's the number one thing. First, you find your horizontal size, then you kind of go and you figure out all of the different, do you need to, is there noise on the side? Do you cut off anything of the profile at that point? But that's the number one step. So if you could figure that out through MAME or through any other way, then you could kind of base it off of that, and everything else should be a lot easier once you've gotten that. Another question from Robert Dickinson. They're looking to start practicing soldering, and the only item they don't see on the page are fume extractors. Is there a model under 100 that you'd recommend? So a friend of mine made me one from a 3D print design, and he labeled it "The Voltar Sucks." It's hysterical. But to be honest, I have right here is a window, and I just have a reversible fan, so that's all I use. And that's all I've used for a while. And when I was working out of that office in Brooklyn, there were no windows, and I probably should have had some kind of fume extractor, but I just didn't. So I don't have any good recommendations. A fan by the window is definitely a good way to do it, because I would be soldering and you could just watch all of the fumes just stream right out the window. And it smelled a lot less in the room too. So I mean, that just based on my limited experience, that would be my first suggestion. And other than that, if you're away from the window, have any kind of fan or fume extractor. I guess with a filter too, so you don't want any like gunk building up, blowing it away from you towards a window, and then an exhaust fan coming out of the window. Just try your best not to breathe it in is the most important part. I got to the point for years, even when I was about to say even when I sucked at soldering, but I'm not much better. But even when I barely knew anything, I still, because I'd done it as a kid, it was just a natural thing for me that like breathe in as you're soldering, slowly exhale so you're blowing the fumes away from you. When you go to clean the tip, breathe in and go back and blow the fumes away from you. So it's kind of second nature for me, but I would recommend other methods, but that certainly wouldn't hurt as well. Par Strindeval had a pretty cool question that I don't know the answer to, but I still want to talk through it anyway. So they wanted to do the FRAM mod for their Saturn, which is you remove the chip that's there that's powered by a battery, which holds your save games, which means when the battery's removed or the battery dies, you lose all your save games, and you replace it with an FRAM chip that is kind of like flash memory. So you just, until that chip dies, you don't have to worry about losing anything regardless of the battery. And the mod that they found was by cutting the trace to the real-time clock and powering that just by the regular PSU, so that the battery is only powering the memory chip. And this way, the downside is every time you unplug the console, you lose the real-time clock. You leave it plugged in, you're fine. But the upside is because the battery is only powering the memory chip, you might get a lot longer life off of it. I love the theory behind it, but I've never tested it. None of my friends have tested it, so I have no real life results to base it off of. I do understand why you might hesitate to do the FRAM mod, because it is kind of a pain, especially if the chip's on the bottom of the motherboard, because that's when they would also have to glue them on, and the pads are super sensitive. I did the FRAM mod twice to mine, worked perfect the first time, and all of what I thought I did was right the second time, but I didn't even realize the pads are so sensitive that I must have pulled up a pad even when just using hot air. So, I don't know. And with this, with the satiator out and with the new app that we just posted something, Samson 7.1 just posted a video and a post about this that allows you to copy saves back and forth from your Saturn to the SD card on the satiator. I'm wondering if something like that really is the best choice for everybody, because you don't have to mod anything, you don't have to worry about screwing this stuff up, and especially if you're using something like the satiator, when you're done with a game that has a save game file, you could always just reset back to menu, copy it from the Saturn to your card, and then kind of be good on that. As long as you keep replacing the battery regularly and make sure, like, all right, before I start my game, because a lot of Saturn games don't have save files, so that's, it wouldn't matter for those. But if you're in a game where you got some hours into, pull the plug out of your Saturn, count to 5, plug it back in. If it loses the date, throw another battery in there, and then keep going. So that would be an easier way to back up your saves that has no mod whatsoever. But I don't know if there really is a right answer for this, unless somebody invents a battery that lasts, a million times longer where you could just throw one of those in instead. But yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch the video that you posted. I've been swamped trying to catch up with a very, very long backlog, but I'd like to watch it at some point, and I'll ask people about it. But for me personally, I would either not do anything and just buy a big bag of batteries for cheap, and constantly back them up one way or another with the cartridge or to the satiator, or I would just do the FRAM mod. Swimming wants to know if I know anybody in the New York metro area who would offer recaps on something like an FW900, as they're seeming to develop some issues. They're doubtful, seeing how I imagine nobody wants to touch these things, but I figure I might as well ask. I do know a few people, but the problem is, and I'm not talking about you, I'm just talking in general, a lot of people hear the term recap, and they might even see a video of something like a Core Graphics where there's like 10 capacitors in it, and they might think, oh cool, I'll go get my monitor recapped, I'll go drive up and just wait for it to get done, and they don't realize that there's hundreds of capacitors, and doing just a full shotgun recap on it where you just replace every one takes days. I mean, you have to take out each one, you have to get their values. If there's no cap list, you have to make your own, then you have to order the other ones. It's so easy to order the wrong ones sometimes. So if you order 50 different caps, you might have only gotten 49 of the right ones. So I do know people that do it, but it's really expensive because it should be. This isn't like $100 thing where like you come back in an hour and it's done. This is very expensive. That's an awesome monitor though. So in my personal opinion, yeah, I would absolutely spend a ton of money to have somebody recap and then calibrate a monitor. So if you're really interested, let me know. I could point in the direction of a few people. But if you want to go down this road, just know that you're in for some cost, and you're going to have to drive the monitor back and forth to in most cases, to the people that do it. This isn't somebody like you throw them an extra $20 to drive to your place and have them do it there type of thing. So yeah, let me know. And the same thing, if you're looking to get rid of it, there are people out there that collect these things. I collect them in any shape. I just am limited to my space. But there are people that want to make sure that a lot of these rare and unique monitors are restored and put into places where, eventually people could kind of use them and have it more of an educational thing. So that's also the other reason why I'm collecting a bunch of the extra ones and just spreading out all the monitors I get throughout all of my friends' basements over the tri-state area. Luckily, none of them have told me to take a hike yet, but I'm just trying to get as much as I can just to make sure that the stuff gets preserved. So that's always an option, selling it for a fair price and using that to pick up something else. Photo Sven, I think I'm saying it right, was wondering if I knew of an arcade-style controller or stick that works on both the original Nintendo and the Super Nintendo, other than the originals from back in the day. So I had a friend of mine mod an MC Cthulhu. I think that's, I'm probably saying Cthulhu wrong. In fact, I know I am, but mod one of those in. You hook it up directly to the buttons, and then it has a network jack on the output side, and then you could plug a custom cable that goes from like Super Nintendo to network jack in it, and that worked perfectly. They're kind of hard to get though. I believe Brook Retro makes stuff that I don't know if it does NES and SNES, but that's certainly worth looking into. So at that point, just kind of pick any arcade stick that has on-off buttons. So standard arcade buttons, not any weird. Occasionally we'll see some weird stuff, and you're able to mod it directly into that. And it's not so hard, so you could do it yourself. You could have somebody else do it, but that would definitely be it. And the only other thing is if that upcoming 8-bit DOE stick does work with their other retro receivers, you should be able to use both Super Nintendo and Nintendo ones, but there's no info on that yet. John Anderson is trying to figure out what to do with their PlayStation 1 because their SCART switch hooked up to the PVM is currently full, so they were thinking they'd use the HD Retrovision component cables with BNC adapters. With a later model PS1, will this stop me from losing Litecoin games? I think so. I think you would really need one of those SCART cables that has the RCA broken out. So my suggestion to you would then be, do you have a Genesis 2 in the mix? If so, maybe just use the HD Retrovision cables for those, and then get SCART cables for the other one. Also, if you're talking about using the outputs of your PVM for BNC, I wouldn't recommend doing that. I've seen people do it before. So the setup is a bunch of, a SCART to BNC adapter in the RGBS inputs, and then another SCART to BNC adapter or whatever else into the RGBS outputs. They're not really meant to be used like that, and I don't know if you could do any damage, but at the very least, you'd probably have some picture quality issues. So, there's a couple of other options you could think about, but I guess I would just put all of that stuff into perspective too. But yeah, I mean, the easiest thing would be to use, if you had like 2 switches that you were switching between, one component and one SCART, then yeah, maybe use the HD Retrovisions for the Genesis and then just pick up that other one with a composite adapter for the PlayStation. Diego says they have a PAL N64 with the N64 RGB kit by Tim Worthington in it, and they could only seem to find one SCART N64 cable, and it's for NTSC consoles. Would that still work? It's a really good question. I always try to test PAL stuff. I just don't have enough equipment to. If I were you, I would just pick up a PAL Super Nintendo cable and use that instead. And as long as it's shielded, you won't have any issue. You shouldn't have any issue with the fact that it uses composite video for sync. But you could check Tim's website and see if he has any specific info on PAL consoles. But as far as I know, the people that I've spoken to just use Super Nintendo cables, and everything seems to work fine. The only scenario would be if you're going into a device that requires C-Sync that will not put out composite video, but that's not as common a scenario as it used to be. So I think that would probably be the safer bet. And also, Diego says they just received the Neo Geo MVS. Do I recommend to consolize it? It's a weird system to have a decent Is it a weird system to have a decent output signal? No, actually, I think it's an awesome system to consolize. And by consolize, you could do something as little as put it on a piece of cardboard so it doesn't short anything out, and buy some of the cheaper Neo Geo super guns that they have out for it. One of the videos that I would like to do before the end of the year is a Neo Geo super gun shootout, because there's a couple of really inexpensive ones out there, or I guess more fairly priced, I should say, that as long as you're just using it with the Neo Geo work totally fine. So hopefully I'll get around to that one, but yeah, it's awesome. I mean, you'll get really high quality video as long as you bought one that's built correctly and outputs the right voltages on all the lines, including audio. I mean, you'd have a really great experience. And also, thanks very much for the kind words. Much appreciated. Jason Guffey says they don't have a question this week. They just want to talk about alcohol. What you drinking lately? Well, I already talked about the same beer that I've been nursing the entire time I've been doing this. But I actually have been so swamped lately that I really haven't had a chance to experience any kind of new and awesome kind of alcohols or anything like that. That Legion whiskey I talked about was definitely awesome, and I'm not even the biggest whiskey fan. I just really liked that. But unfortunately, any chance I've had to hang out with people, it's just whatever we can get the most conveniently, which has been a lot of stuff like White Claw and Truly and stuff like that, because everybody has them now and they don't have any carbs in them, so it's that's kind of the go-to. But other than that, no, I wish I had some other recommendations. The next time I get out to Jersey and hang out with the Answer Infinity crew, I'm sure they'll turn me on to something new and awesome. Also, you said you've been chipping through my back catalog while you work from home and just finished the interview with Pat. You're going to get me hooked on buying every damn CRT I could find. Yeah, Pat was a really good person to talk to. He was very fun to hang out with in person. Just a guy with a wealth of knowledge. And I am just a huge fan of CRTs. And as I've already repeated myself a million times in this one, I am really trying to look to archive some of this stuff so that we could restore them and have a place at some point, whether it's a museum or a video game museum that already exists that we just kind of work with. But I would love to have a place where people could go to experience these things, because the clock's ticking on how much longer people are going to be having these. So being able to refurbish them and leave them someplace safe where they're going to last for another 30, 40, 50 years was something that's kind of important to me. So I'm working on that. Ghetto Bill Gates said they just got a cluster of dead pixels in that budget LG set I recommended over the TCL a while back. Looks like those are no longer made. Can you recommend any current or available on Amazon at least budget 43-inch for their bedroom? So Digital Foundry did a video on this earlier this year, and they basically said the newest version of that same exact LG set would work fine. I use mine every single day. I know this is kind of a waste of a TV, but I use it as like my nightlight. So like not all night, but it's like, all right, it's the end of the night. Like I'm getting ready, turn the TV on first. And many times I even just end up leaving it on for 15 minutes and then turning it off and not actually watching anything, but it's on all the time. And you know, it's also a TV because it's cheaper and because it's LCD. Sometimes it gets a little bit more abuse. Like I would never just leave my OLED on. Like that's only on when I'm watching it. But there was a few times I was in the middle of something, paused something, came back like 40 minutes later and went, oh crap, the TV is still on, and there's 0 dead pixels. So I mean, whenever there's mass production of cheap stuff like that, there's going to be stuff that's just occasional duds, and it sucks. I've gotten the duds plenty times in my life, and it sounds like that's what you got in yours. So that stinks. Sorry. I mean, for a cheap TV, I've been pretty impressed with it, but every year that cheap model gets better and better. They upgrade the panel, they upgrade the features. So I would take a look at Digital Foundry's video and see what they have to say about it. And I think I just saw something about a new line of TCLs, so I would check out that video and kind of figure out where to go from there. But I was really happy with the price I paid for mine, and I haven't had any issues. So I'm sorry to hear that you've had issues on yours. Well, that's it for this time. As always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these. I do very much enjoy doing them. And if you're new to any of these Q&As, ask any question you want. Just please ask them wherever the latest Q&A post is, wherever that you support. Because just the way these services work, I can't just click on like newest comments. I have to actually go through to each one, and it would be impossible to sift through the older ones. So any question you want, just ask them right there. And of course, thank you all so much for your support, because without it, none of these crazy things I'm involved with could happen. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you next week.